Hi there, and welcome to my new Mutalist Cernos build guide, because the old one is outdated, for several reasons which I will be explaining further down the video. First off, this is an unranked Korra that does not have any mods, nor do I have a companion equipped, and who the fuck cares about that anyways. So yeah, let's go right into it. What am I going to tell you in this video? First off, this video is going to be more structured than the last one, because the last one was filmed at 4 AM out of sleep deprivation, and this one I'm doing, well, I'm actually halfway awake, I'd say. Yes, that fits it very nicely. Okay then. Now, what I'm going to explain to you first is how does this weapon even work. This Mutalist Cernos that I'm using. Oh yeah. This is actually the Mutalist Cernos. I just changed its name. Maybe I shouldn't do that if I'm going to make a build guide on it, but yeah. What does the Mutalist Cernos do? Well, it's a bow, so it fires arrows. One thing the arrows do is when you shoot them, they're followed by this little toxin cloud that you could see coming in from the right of my screen, which follows the arrow and lands at the exact same spot where the arrow lands, and causes a little cloud which you cannot see entirely visibly, but you can guess that it's there. Yeah, that's what the Mutalist Cernos does. Now then, how does it work with mods? Mutalist Cernos interacts very normally with most types of mods. It has, if you put base damage on it, you get more damage. If you put multi-shot on it, you shoot more arrows. If you put crit on it, it crits. If you put status on it, you get more status. Yada yada yada. The only thing where it acts kind of out of the norm, not entirely out of the norm, but slightly out of the norm, is how it interacts with elemental mods, because there are very few weapons that actually function similarly to the Mutalist Cernos, because the Mutalist Cernos, on its arrows, only has impact, puncture, and slash damage. However, the clouds that it leaves cause pure toxin damage. So if you put an element that is not toxin, or even toxin actually, if you put an element on the Mutalist Cernos, then the arrows will just have normal IPS as they already did, but also have this basic element. However, the clouds will combine. So say you put heat on your Mutalist Cernos, your arrows will do IPS, but also heat damage. However, your clouds, because they combine toxin and heat, will deal gas damage, and also cause gas status procs, because the Mutalist Cernos, more than anything, is a status weapon. How do I know that? I know it because it has an incredibly high status chance, probably one of the highest in the entire game. Yeah, probably. Now, what happens if you put several elemental mods on the Mutalist Cernos? Say you put heat and cold on the Mutalist Cernos. What happens then? Now then, your arrows will be doing blast damage because heat and cold combines into blast, while your toxic clouds will still do toxin, but they'll also cause blast damage. So far, so reasonable. What would happen if you were to put, in this order, toxin, cold, and heat on the Mutalist Cernos? That is a very good question, and I have no fucking idea what happens then, because there's no need and no use in doing that right now. And this is where we come to the next point on my list, which is a big bug that currently affects the Mutalist Cernos and most of, if not all of it, no, just most of its builds. That's the big bug that if you put any elemental combination at all, doesn't matter if you put an elemental combination and then a singular mod, say Viral Heat, or two elemental combos on the bow. If you do that, put any elemental combination on the bow, then your base damage goes down drastically for no apparent reason. I can show this to you. Ignore the builds, just look at the base damage values. The base damage right now is 1700 roughly, doesn't matter how close we look at it. And now 100 munitions obviously doesn't do any damage. Now we put on Malignant Force. Watch the base damage. It goes down drastically. And yeah, no fucking clue why. No fucking clue why. I can't tell you that much. It has something to do with the elemental combinations. The way elemental damage is combined, because the game itself does not seem to understand how to differentiate between the arrows hitting the target and the clouds causing follow-up damage. That is a big bug. That's why most builds are not functional. So, which builds are not functional? In fact, any elemental combination, as I just said, is not functional. Many people say it's just elemental combinations that include toxin. That is not true. In fact, any combination is bugged, as I'm going to show you. I'm going to make magnetic, just because I can. Oh, fuck me then. Watch the electricity damage. This is 627. So if I put on Cryo Rounds, which is not max rank, this is basically unranked, this should increase marginally and go to magnetic, because cold and electricity combines into magnetic. What happens is, instead of marginally increasing, it actually just fucking disappears. Like, what the fuck happened here? We're going from 627 electric damage to 9 magnetic damage. Any elemental combination you put on this bow is bugged, and you lose out on all of your elemental damage if you take them. It also the way that it works is that you also decrease your base damage, which means that all of your status effects basically do no damage. So do not use elemental combinations in this bow. Now what also happens is, compare the following mod, giving you 627 elemental damage, this time around cold. Now compare this to Malignant Force. You get, instead of 627 cold damage, you get 20 toxin damage. So toxin in itself is also bugged. What does that leave us with? Now we can cross out any builds containing elemental combinations. Any builds including an elemental combination is bugged, so we cannot use those. What we can use, what we can also not use, is any toxin build. That leaves us with 3 basic elements. It leaves us with cold, as shown here. It leaves us with heat, as shown here, functioning correctly, or with electricity. So we have 3 builds: cold, heat, electricity. Those are the only builds that are not bugged. Any other build is bugged, and a lot worse than it should be because of that bug. Where did I put my dear Rime Round? No clue. Rime Rounds. Yep. What did we have before? Definitions, okay. And then, this is where I go into builds. As I just said, 3 types of builds: a cold build, a heat build, and an electricity build. What does this mean, putting cold, heat, and electricity on your weapon? What it means is, if you put cold on your Mutalist Cernos, you will get arrows that deal cold damage, but you get clouds that cause viral damage. And what synergizes best with viral? It's slash, my dear friends. Mutalist Cernos has a horrendous base critical chance of 15%. This is why this time around I'm showing the build with a riven, because holy shit, you need it to make this work. 67% crit chance is manageable. 15 isn't. Now that we have that out of the way, what's the next build? Next build is a heat build. That's how the heat build looks like. You just put on a lot of heat because elemental status effects, elemental status damage, scales with how much elemental damage you put on the weapon. A good example of how this used to work is old gas, where you would put a singular heat mod and as much toxin as you could fit on your weapon to make sure that the gas procs, the toxin procs caused by the gas, would be as big as possible. Sadly, gas is not an element any longer. It got removed by DE. This thing that you see here, this is a visual bug. There is actually no such thing as gas. I refuse to believe otherwise. This means that we don't actually have an elemental combination because heat and toxin, as of right now, combine into hot farts. And hot farts on a weapon don't do much good. This is why the heat build is inherently worse. It does not have a supportive stat from the clouds. The heat build is basically a build where you completely ignore the fact that the Mutalist Cernos causes clouds, which is not good, obviously. You want to make the most of the weapon. Moving on to the electricity build. If you're putting electricity on your Mutalist Cernos, you're getting electricity, big fucking surprise. Electricity also causes a DPS effect. If you proc electricity on a target, it gets electrocuted for damage ticks. This works similar to slash heat toxin, it's just slightly worse than all of those effects. But it's still functional and it makes sense to take a look at this, especially on this weapon, because if we combine toxin and electricity, instead of getting hot farts like we did in the heat build, we actually get something useful, namely corrosive. Corrosive on the clouds. Now, why do we need corrosive on the clouds? Because if you shoot a target and it doesn't die, you strip its armor and the follow-up shot will do massively increased damage, and also the electricity electrocution effect will also have its damage increased because it's not getting reduced by as much armor. That is why we want corrosive. Of course, corrosive right now is considerably weaker than viral ever since its nerf, and it doesn't completely strip armor any longer, which is a damn shame, but that's how it is. It's still a very, very useful element to have, even if it's not as strong as a viral. Now, before I go into actually showcasing these builds, we'll talk about variations in these builds, namely mods that you could put on there. Before we talk about mods that you could put on there, which mods would you take off? You need both of these. You need damage, you need multi-shot. I guess you could argue that this amount of crit chance is overkill because we have a lot of crit chance on here already, but then again, having 67% crit chance instead of 44% crit chance is very useful. But we have a lot of crit damage. We have 3 crit damage mods. This one provides status chance. This weapon is a status weapon. It has 49% basic status chance. That is a lot. We want to capitalize on that. That is why we're keeping Hammer Shot no matter what. You can leave out Vital Sense and swap in something else. That is a very reasonable possibility here. You can do this. It will make a lot of sense, depending on which mod you choose instead. Now, what mods could you put on there? One classic mod that you could always put on there is good old Heavy Caliber. But this is a bow. This doesn't look like much. It really doesn't look like much. But if you have 5 multi-shot, so if you shoot 5 arrows with one single drawing of the bow, and if Heavy Caliber, trust me, your arrows will go all over the screen, but they will not hit your target, especially not in the head. So Heavy Caliber is a big no-no. Obviously, what is there to be put on this bow? There's Bane mods. Bane mods give you a 55% increased damage, and Vital Sense gives you an increase of crit damage from 6.4 to 8.8. If you were to multiply 6.4 by 1.55, which is a Bane mod increase. I'm actually going to do this right now. 6.4 multiplied by 1.55, you'd get 9.92. So on any arrow that crits, instead of a 8.8x multiplier, you'd have a 10x multiplier basically. What this translates to is another 60% critical damage if you were to compare the two things. If you were comparing Bane mods to crit damage mods and assume that your arrows always hit critical hits, within which they don't, obviously, then you'd get about a 60% critical damage mod out of extra on top from a Bane mod. So Bane mods are worth it. Yes, Bane mods are good on the Mutalist Cernos when you slot them out for Vital Sense. However, Bane mods are only good against a singular faction. Vital Sense works against any faction that you encounter, so you wouldn't have to change mods before a mission. On the other hand, I mean, not every arrow hits a critical strike, so the actual damage increase is obviously slightly higher than what I'm making it out to be. On the other hand, when you're comparing critical hits that occur about 2/3 of the time and do 8.8 times as much damage, do you really want to rely on the non-crits which don't do anything in the first place? Not really. But yeah. End of the discussion is that Bane mods are better, but they're a big hassle. And what else could you put on there? Good old organ scope, fucking expensive as hell. No, skip. Just don't do it. Vigilante armaments, no, skip, don't do it. Why don't you want those two mods? Because consistency is a thing. If you shoot 5 arrows and you have a 66% chance to hit a critical strike, that means that you expect 3 out of those 5 arrows to hit a critical strike anyways. So you're always going to crit when you shoot. The question is not whether you're critting, the question is how often do you crit? Do you crit 1 time? Unlikely. Do you crit 2 times? Yes, if you're unlucky. Do you crit 3 times? Probably. Do you crit 4 times? Might as well happen, is actually rather likely. You don't need more crit chance. Crit chance is something you bring to get more consistent crits. You do not need more consistent crits. You have very consistent crits. You need more crit damage. You need as much crit damage as you can get. Vigilante armaments obviously is a big no-no because you have 400% multi-shot already. You don't need 60% multi-shot on top. That's not worth it. Not at all. If you're rolling a riven, actually, you also do not want multi-shot on the riven. You want damage on the riven. Mutalist Cernos wants base damage as much as you can get. This is something where you'd consider arcanes actually. Because you can't put on heavy caliber, you already have Amalgam Serration. But what you can do is put on Arcane Rage for a lot of extra base damage. A lot of extra base damage. Okay, what else is there to put on? Oh yeah, Speed Trigger / Vile Acceleration for a quicker draw time. Now the Mutalist Cernos doesn't draw slowly. Not at all actually. 0.5 draw rate is a lot better than something like, say, Lens. But, come on. That draw rate is awesome. If you like fast-paced shooting and you don't like waiting half a second for your arrow to draw and then having to aim as well, which is something that I can very much understand, then I recommend you to use Vile Acceleration. Of course, what you could also do is use an arcane for that too, because there is one. What's the name again? Did I forget the name? I think I forgot the name of the arcane. Ah, there it is, Arcane Acceleration. 90% fire rate to primary weapons. The big difference between Vile Acceleration and this arcane is that this Vile Acceleration mod has a doubled value for bows. The arcane doesn't, sadly. So you're getting a lot more value from Vile Acceleration than you get from the arcane. So I do recommend Vile Acceleration. If you want utility, go Vile Acceleration, is totally fine. Now, there's 2 more mods that we can talk about here that are actually really big contestants on all the builds. Those 2 mods are Rifle Aptitude for a lot of status chance on a bow that thrives off of status chance. Now where would you put this? You put it anywhere. Obviously Vital Sense is the primary target of what you'd swap out. So on any build where you can't swap out Vital Sense, you can't slot in Rifle Aptitude, because everything else you need. Now the other contestant is someone that you don't see at all. Nope, not Firestone. It's Continuous Misery. Continuous Misery is a mod that you barely ever see used on any weapon, because it just doesn't make sense to mod for status duration. Why? Why is that? Status duration is one of the strongest stats in this game, especially on status DPS weapons such as the Mutalist Cernos, but on any 100 munitions weapon. The reason is the time it takes for this damage to actually go off. 100% status duration means that you get double the damage that you dealt before, but you also have to wait double the time to get that damage. So your actual damage per second does not increase unless you fire several times. But even then, if you fired several times, you might as well just do that without Continuous Misery and just overkill your target to kill it faster, which is something that most players do, because it makes more sense. It's easier to fire a lot and overkill a target very quickly than to fire a few shots and then wait for the target to die. Why is that so? That is so because if you wait for a target to die, you invest time in something that is not worth investing time into. This is a looter shooter, horde shooter. You want to kill as much as possible. Waiting for something to die is not an option. On the other hand, you are also giving your target time to hit you back. You don't want that. You want something to die as quick as possible. Now, if I'm shitting on this mod as hard as I do, why do I still say it's one of the biggest contestants? That's because this weapon causes so much DPS, so many status procs, and it's an end game weapon where you want as much damage as you can get to completely overkill a target, that this mod actually becomes useful again. You're planning to kill level 9000 enemies with this mod. You're giving those enemies time to hit you back. Anyways, your frame is probably capable of tanking them or of being invisible to not even get shot in the first place. And you need as much damage as you can get because there is no overkilling a level 9000 target. You want to see it die, for fuck's sake. Doesn't matter the cost. So waiting a bit is fine. Overkilling it is not going to happen, so no matter how long you wait, the point is mainly that it dies. It just needs to die. If you have to wait a lot more time, that's fine, at least it dies. That's why Continuous Misery is good on this bow. It's an endgame mod. Okay then, that is all the mods. Time to explain the builds. Very basically, crit chance, crit damage, status chance from those. Some status chance, cold for viral clouds, damage multi-shot, and 100 munitions. Nothing special about this build. It's just a viral slash build. Run-of-the-mill viral slash. Terminal velocity for projectile speed. Very good on bows. You want that. Now then. Oh yeah, once again, to prove that I didn't actually equip any of the arcanes. Completely empty frame. And I don't have any companions. Oh yeah. Venari has some tank mods, I guess. Yeah. Nothing skewing with our results here. Now then. What we need to account for is that when we shoot this guy, we want him to take the maximum amount of virus stacks. Ignore Venari. We want him to have the maximum amount of virus stacks. We also want to stack up our split flights. Split flights, upper right corner is at 4 stacks. This guy is at 9. 9 viral stacks, that's sufficient. He fucking dies. This guy doesn't die. Now why is that? That's the hunting munitions difference. Sometimes hunting munitions procs on your 5 arrows that you shoot in the guy's face, and it doesn't. Now you shoot 5 arrows, you have a 66% chance to hit a critical strike on each of those arrows. That means that expectedly 3 out of your 5 arrows hit critical strikes. Hunter Missions has a 35% critical chance to apply upon a critical hit, so you expect 1 Hunter Munitions proc per Mutalist Cernos bow shot. That is how it usually ends up. Really does. And if not, you shoot a second time, and by then your target is probably dead. And if not, then you're completely unlucky, and I'll laugh at you. Stop, for fuck's sake. Okay then, as you can see, they die really fucking fast. Now then, to what do they die? To the slash proc caused by Hunter Munitions. How big is that Hunter Munitions proc? I don't know if you can see the numbers. It's hard because there's a lot of numbers on the screen. This one was very cleanly visible. This was not on 10 viral stacks, it was a 9 viral stacks, but it didn't matter. What you saw was a 51,000 slash proc that ticked repeatedly. That is a very big slash proc. You usually see those numbers with a Grand Prime and nothing else. So that is very good. If you're actually at 10 viral stacks, you usually cause 55,000 slash procs if you cause 1 headshot slash. If you cause 2 headshot slash, which just happened on this poor sword, then you deal double the damage obviously. You do 110,000 critical strikes. As happened to this guy again. 110 crit strikes. Insane. Insanity. This build is the strongest one by far. We're skipping heat for now, because heat is a little bit weird, and continuing on with electricity. Now what do you want from electricity? Electricity is not a DPS build. Electricity does not work with DPS as much. You have DPS from electric stealth effects, but you mostly want the upfront damage that you get by reducing the target's armor with Corrosive. How does that look? It looks something like this. Waiting for the guys to proc Corrosive, for your split flight stack, and BAT! You shoot him in the face. He takes a lot of damage. Now I wasn't sure if that guy was affected by a slash proc, so I didn't count that one, but as you can see, there's a lot of upfront damage, and electricity also causes a decent amount of damage. The big DPS that you see here does not come from Toxin, it comes from electricity, as you can tell by Toxin damage not doing anything, while electricity do a lot. Now, as you can see, the corrosive claws are actually really good at stripping targets, and they just die. They just die. It's nowhere near as overkilly as Hunter Munitions. It's a lot more reliable though, in a sense, I guess. It's also more upfront, so you don't have to wait as long. This build shines because it's so upfront, does what it's supposed to do, kills targets up to level, I don't know, 300, 400, very quickly and efficiently. Nice, that's what you want. Now then, this is where we talk about the other mods. You don't want continuous misery here, because this build works with upfront damage in a sense. Rifle aptitude gives you the upfront damage quicker and increases your electricity DPS consistency. So if your upfront damage doesn't immediately kill the guy, he will die to a lot of electric procs relatively quickly. While continuous misery would also make him die to electric procs, but not relatively quickly, but painstakingly slowly. So rifle aptitude is a very good option here. Continuous misery is a big no-no. You could put continuous misery here. This is what you could do. Big spoiler, I used this exact build in Corrupted Survival on Ani. And I went up against level 7.5 thousand enemies, and they still died to this build. Not in one shot, in 2 shots. So I guess if you were to put continuous misery here, you would still one-shot them, but it would take longer than shooting them 2 times. So there's no real time efficiency in that. I really don't recommend continuous misery unless you have to. I have not been to level 9000 yet with this bow, or at all for that matter, but that doesn't matter. So I can't tell you if continuous misery is necessary for level 9000 enemies. I can guarantee you do not want it against level 7500 enemies. Okay, rifle aptitude. Remember last results, you had a lot of upfront crit damage with your bow and some DPS with electricity. This is going to look very similar actually. You have slightly less upfront damage, but more DPS. Does this look better to you? To me it does actually. I think this looks better. This looks more consistent, more usable. The last build mostly killed the targets in one shot. Sometimes it didn't, and you had to shoot a second time. This build always kills them in one shot. It either immediately hits them down, or it kills them with DPS. Now the last build would kill them immediately, a lot more often than this build does, but this build electrocutes them more efficiently, and they die to that, and they're stun locked in the electricity animation while they die, so they don't hit you back. So they die slightly fast, they die slightly more slowly with this build, but they die slightly more consistently. So this kills slightly slower, but slightly more consistently. This is why I would recommend this build over the other one if you like consistency and usability. If you like big fat numbers, you want to go with Vital Sense here. I'll stick to Vital Sense, I guess, because it has the right polarity. No more reason than that. It's not like I use this build a lot. This is for people who like Corrosive and like upfront damage. This build wasn't meant to be played upfront, but it can definitely do that, as just shown, against high level enemies. And I guess having upfront damage against level 300 to 400 enemies is very nice, very nice. Nothing wrong with that. Most weapons cannot bring the sufficient amount of upfront damage that it takes to kill a level 300 enemy. Now the heat build. This is the heat build. We have the usual, those 5 mods, they're pretty much everywhere. But now we mod for heat, we have a different riven. This one has heat and status chance. Now why the status chance? Because heat works by applying a lot of status. You want as much heat as possible. Now why do I have Prime Bane of Corrupted here? I could put Continuous Misery here, but I just want them higher damage, obviously. No real other option. You could do more heat. That is a possibility. Where is it? Hellfire. I tested this. It's not worth it. Diminishing returns, yada yada. Prime Bane mod is slightly better than Hellfire. You'll just have to trust me on this because there's no way I can slot it. Now, how does this build look? How does this feel when you use it? First, let's get our stacks up, split flight stacks. Now, our clouds do hot farts, so we don't actually want to rely on our clouds. We cannot rely on our clouds. We do slight amount of toxin damage, but because their armor isn't reduced, that toxin damage is negligible. And even with the heat, the toxin doesn't really do much. So what happens is when we shoot them in the face, we proc heat and it kills them. Mostly. Sometimes it doesn't. Actually, mostly it doesn't, to be honest. After the heat runs out, well, this actually kills, I think. Yeah, this actually kills. Oh, this also kills. Oh, impressive. And this one will probably not kill. After the heat runs out, which it will in a few seconds, and take a look at the toxin damage, the minuscule slash damage wherever it may come. Oh, that's vanilla. The target barely takes any damage, and trust me when I say gas literally does 1 damage. Literally 1 damage. So yeah, that's why I'm saying we are doing hot farts to these guys. So we really don't want heat. Now what can we do with this build? Heat apparently seems to be the worst option by far. There's one more thing that you can do here, as much as I hate to admit it. Despite being bugged, elemental combinations can still provide some use, and that use is viral. Viral is so incredibly overpowered that even when it is completely bugged, as you can see here, it still provides enough value because of how much damage it helps you do. Suddenly your clouds become a lot more useful. Why is that? Oh, this is a continuous misery build, by the way. You want as much DPS as you can get. Why is it so? Why is it that putting viral here makes the build a lot better despite being incredibly bugged? Actually not a lot better, but noticeably better. Take a look at those clouds. Those clouds now apply 3 different status effects at once. Why is that? That is because our viral mods, not only do they provide viral, they provide us 100%, 120% status chance. What does that mean? That means we go from 170% status, which is 1.7 status effect, so mostly 2, sometimes 1 status effect per hit, to 2, sometimes 3 status procs per hit. That is a lot. That is a lot. What it also does is, instead of making our clouds cause farts by gassing them, our clouds now do viral, heat, and toxin. And the toxin will get amplified by both viral and heat. So even the toxin has a value now. And heat stacks up really quickly. You'll see that now. So we shoot someone. Here, this guy, we shoot him in the face. Look at the heat procs. The heat procs, they shoot into the sky. The toxin procs as well. We're constantly at 10 viral stacks, and we have so much heat and toxin killing this guy slowly but surely. We shot him once. He was not afflicted by viral before. This guy is now afflicted by viral. Look at what happens. He is just fucking dead, despite the arrow not doing anything apparently. This guy too, he's only at 5 viral stacks. This time the arrow actually did something. They just fucking died, despite this build being completely buggy. Doing a lot less damage on impact. We make our cloud so much more useful that this build actually is better. Because from having a useless elemental effect, 2 useless elemental effects on the clouds, we go from having 2 useless effects, namely gas, also known as farts, and toxin, which doesn't do anything by its own. We go to viral, heat, and toxin. Viral and heat both boosting each other and boosting toxin, so our build suddenly becomes a lot more synergistic. This is why the following build is just better. Despite being bugged, this is the better build, sadly. It's very sad. I hate to admit it. This is caused because the viral meta is so overpowered. Think of this. Viral is so overpowered that you completely ignore all of its damage and waste 2 slots on elemental damage that doesn't even do anything. But the effect, the elemental effect, without doing any specific damage of its own, is so strong that viral is still worth it. That's what happens here. So yeah, one thing that you couldn't get a good grasp of here is the actual damage numbers. Now I actually took a look and recorded some videos and paused them to see how high the damage actually is. This build, as I told you before, does 55,000 slash ticks if you crit someone in the face once, and each time more that you crit them in the face with 100 munitions, it'll do 55,000 on top. That's very good. This electric build does, I think it's 14,000 damage per electricity tick, if you tick electricity on the person. But that's only with 10 corrosive stacks. This is also only with 10 viral stacks. But you mostly have 10 corrosive stacks on them, so that's wonderful then. Now the old heat build, the one that I just showed you before. What was it? Vital Sense, Prime Bane Corrupted, Point Strike. This build, after already having afflicted heat to the target, will do 8,700 heat procs. You can guess why this build is better. So that's not really worth it. As for this one, it's very hard to tell because this one procs so many status effects that no matter how many times I paused and checked, I just never got to see the actual damage number. Sorry about that. But this build, as you could see, did perform better in terms of DPS and reliability. So yeah, that's my new and updated guide on Mutalist Cernos. The things you should take away from this video are the following. Mutalist Cernos is massively bugged for toxin and any elemental combination. So cold, heat and electricity are the best options. However, heat causes such a bad cloud effect that viral heat, despite being bugged, is still better. And that aside, you should take a look at my builds. And now for those of you who don't have a riven for this thing, which is going to be the vast majority, because why the fuck would you have a riven for this? I randomly rolled this and tested the weapon and then found out that it's incredibly strong. You should replace this mod with Organ Scope to get the reliable headshots, to get the reliable crit chance for headshots. What you'll see is that your crit chance is massively decreased. You go from 8.8 to 5.6. Yikes, big fucking yikes. But whatever you do, if you get a riven, you need crit chance in this slot for both of these builds, electric and cold. Especially for the cold one to make 100 munitions work, but also for this one to get the upfront damage. For this one, you don't necessarily need crit chance, as I've just shown you here. You also don't necessarily need critical damage. In fact, here normal damage would have been better. Yes. So if you're going for a heat build like this, you would actually prefer to have damage, heat, and status chance. Yeah. Obviously having a free negative is wonderful. I don't have one here. I'm not going to gamble to get one. This riven is fine as it is because of the 5 out of 5 this build. But yeah. I think that's everything. I've shown you all the builds, explained all the builds, explained what the weapon is bugged. Yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you guys around. This one took way longer than anticipated, but I hope it's worth the watch.